Okay, so I thought we could have a video in which we talk about some of the most common questions I get in the comments and kind of use this as a way to, I don't know, just uh, bring together all the little bits of knowledge on the EliteDesk ProDesk line. And so that way there's maybe a single place that folks could go to just get some basic answers to questions. And so we'd go over some of the key ones or big ones that people have asked and just kind of explain them and hopefully encourage people to ask more questions. So the first question I get probably the most is, can I use components from one generation into the other? So like as example, this is the G2, this is a G3. Is there anything that's movable between those? Hey, I've got a bad fan, I'm missing a caddy, etc., etc. The short answer is no. You cannot use components from generation to generation. I can't take a caddy from here and have it fit in here. And I have several videos that talk about sort of this generation to generation and comparing the different components. You can't swap fans, you can't swap heat sink, you know, you can't, the case. You just can't do it. There's just they look very similar from the outside, but inside each generation they made things a little different. Kind of the only sort of exception to that rule is G4, G5. You can swap things between those. But for the most part, what you're going to want to do is that if you, let's say, had an EliteDesk G3 and you needed some components and you happen to have a ProDesk 600, most likely you could just, swap the parts. The 400 in all the various generations tends to be a little different. That's the ProDesk 400. You might be able to reuse some stuff, but at least in my experience, it generally is the best if you're going to do the swap is between the ProDesk and EliteDesk. You can try it with the 400, see what kinds of stuff work, but the 400 was more kind of, I don't know what they call it, a prosumer or consumer type product. Now, obviously, when it comes to generation, there are some things that you can change and swap and share. Memory is one of them, except of course with the G1 because it uses DDR3 versus DDR4. You can kind of swap the CPUs as long as, of course, the socket's the same size. Um, the SATA and hard drives, they'll fit the same. We don't care about the generation. Those are going to work. Your M.2 NVMe, those are going to work. Got to be a little careful on sizing though. The 2280s, those are going to work from unit to unit. Some of them you can get by with the 2230s. All the other sizes, you're most likely going to need some sort of adapter. Which is another one of the videos I do talk about on how you can fit it in there. Wi-Fi cards, I've used ones from, because those are M.2 sort of sizing. I've swapped those in between. Those work okay. Oh, power supplies. That's the real big one. You can get, if you get a 19.5 volt power supply with the 3 point, now my brain is escaping, but I'll put it in here. But anyway, the one with the right amperage, you can use that on multiple generations and multiple kind of units. Of course, when it comes to some of them, you're going to need a 90 watt, and because you're using the 65 watt non-T processor in there. Okay, so that hopefully will kind of dispel a little bit when it comes to generation or intra generational as far as what you could actually swap. The other question I get a lot is dealing with the 35 watt versus 65 watt. Now, for the most part, 35 and 65 are basically the same unit. The only difference is the CPU. The 35 watt has a T processor where the others have a non-T for the 65 watt. 65 watt units use a 90 watt power supply. The 35 watt use the 65 watt, which is always confusing when you start talking 65 watt in both cases. But one has to do with the unit, one has to do with the actual power supply. The other difference between the 35 and 65 is the heatsink. You've got copper for the 65 and you've got aluminum for the 35. With the 65 watt, there's an additional fan that is normally installed right here. Instead of having sort of this metal plate in between, you would have a fan. The case is going to look different. With the 65 watt, it's going to be vented, where in the 35 watt, it would be solid. Now, again, the motherboards pretty much are identical between the two, except when you get to the G4, G5. Strangely enough, the 35 watt has more options. It's got an extra header that you can use with some of the Flex IO. It has the connectors for an additional GPU that can be added. But for the other ones, you can do. Now, you can turn them from one to the other, upvert, downvert, however you want to call it. If I had a 35 watt and I wanted to now use a non-T processor in it, I could put that in. If you do that, though, you're going to need the caddy with the fan. Otherwise, you're going to get an error every time you use a SATA drive on here, because it's going to say, hey, the fan's not there. So you're definitely going to need that. But what some people do is, and actually I do that on one of my units, is I've got a 35 watt unit that I started out with. I kept the T processor, but I added the copper heatsink and the cover just to kind of cool things down a little bit. It made a little bit of difference, but it wasn't tremendous. But likewise too, you could get a 65 watt unit and you go, I don't want to have to deal with a 90 watt power supply anymore. You could just go ahead and put a T processor in there, and it would sort of downgrade it a little bit, but then you wouldn't need it. And again, remember, if you started with T, go to non-T, you're going to need a 90 watt power supply. Otherwise, you're going to get a bunch of beeps and it's just not going to boot because it says, hey, I don't have enough juice in order to run. The next most common question deals with Windows 11, especially when this whole impending Windows 10 losing support in October, and of course, even though there are ways where you can get extended support, et cetera, a lot of people are focused on how can I get Windows 11, and I've a series of videos on how to install it on older hardware, and I'll include links on that. But the basic thing is that Windows 11 will pretty much run on anything. I mean, this is the G1, runs great on the G1. This, of course, is a G4, which is a unit that's fully supported by Microsoft for Windows 11. This, by far not supported. This one, you can even, I think, hide the security device on it. And but again, it will still work. The thing, though, with installing Windows on these units is that not every unit has the right license that you're going to need. I've run across some in which it actually was only licensed for something called FreeDOS, which is basically a giveaway. It's literally FreeDOS. No Windows key in there at all. If you try to run it, it says, hey, where's the Windows key? So that's something to kind of check for before if you ever go and that's in a video I have that talks about when your hardware key doesn't work and where I kind of got bit by a particular issue and something to look out for. There's also a case where you might want to have Windows 11, let's say Pro, but your unit is only licensed for home. And that's something that you can easily tell if you can get the serial number of the unit. You can go to the HP parts server, you can look it up, and it will show you what it's licensed for. Also on the back of the unit, a lot of times you can see also what it's licensed for. I mean, Pro and Home, there's not a real big difference with them. You can even upgrade Home to Pro. The only thing that I would see with Pro that would be of any use is that it's got remote desktop. Remote desktop in. Both Home and Pro have, remote desktop out, but this would be a case where you could have remote desktop set up on that Pro system, go to another unit and RDP into it and control it, which might be kind of cool if you're, I don't know, trying to help somebody else and et cetera, but it's not a huge thing. If you were ever looking at two units and they were about the same price and you could tell that one had Pro and one had Home, I would get the one with the Pro. The other thing is that not every unit is going to allow you to jump right into Windows 11 for the install. I had some where they had like a Windows 8 Pro, and I had to first install Windows 10, then do all the little registry hacks and so forth. Then I could do 11 on top of it to upgrade it, and then I was fine. But I couldn't jump directly to Windows 11. So that's something to kind of look out for, and that's talked about in that hardware key video. But again, I wouldn't worry too much about, everyone talking about old hardware and Windows 11 and so forth. Yeah, you might have a case where Microsoft is going to say for some flavor of Windows 11, you can no longer get updates. Well, in that case, you just do you do your own upgrade and you move it. That's what I had to do with the unit, the G3 that I do all my videos on, and it wasn't a big deal. Now, the last one, I mean, I get a lot of different questions, but as far as popularity, would probably be someone saying, hey, I just bought this, or I'm thinking of buying that. Is that a good deal? Did I get a good deal? And a lot of that will depend on where you're coming from. Is this US, non-US? Is it maybe UK versus Europe versus Asia? Because as I hear from a lot of my international viewers, these units aren't as cheap overseas, and they're a lot harder to come by. So you are going to, spend a lot more. So when someone's saying, "Hey, I just spent, I don't know, 150 euros on a G3 with this and this and this," and I go, "Wow, that seems like a lot. I could probably get it for 50 or whatever." I have to remember that it's quite possible that that's all they can get, and similar units could be 200, 250. It also comes down to, okay, is this a bare bones unit? Is this one that says that it hasn't been tested? Parts, etc. So what I would do is, if you're trying to determine, hey, did I get a good deal? Look to see what else is selling that has similar specs, and cases where the seller actually says, hey, I tested this. Because if I've got listing A, listing B, and I don't know, they're both a G3 and they both have 16 gig of memory and 256 SSD, and one says, hey, I don't know if it works. The other one says, oh yeah, I tested it, everything's fine. Well, obviously you want to do the one that's tested. If it's saying it's not tested, a I don't know, parts only, they're just trying to cover themselves if you come back and say it didn't work. That one better be pretty cheap because you're taking, quite a risk. You should go in with the idea that, okay, this is a parts computer if they're not going to tell me that it's tested. There's always the nice gamble. Um, I've done fairly well, but I also have been where nope, it's dead. It's not going anywhere. In that case, what you want to do is look to see what you would be getting, what kind of components. Is there a CPU I can reuse? Is there memory? Is there an SSD? Could I pull the caddy out? Could I pull fans? Could I use it somewhere else? If you add all those up, is that what those individual components could cost? Is that far greater than what you're paying for it? If it's about the same, I don't know, you're not really making out much. And then now you got this dead thing kind of sitting around. Although, dead units, always great. You can always pull something off of them. So whether something is a good deal or not really depends on what other things we're selling at the same time so that you can have a good basis. If you're thinking of buying something, really do your research. Make sure you've got the pictures. Make sure you got all your questions answered. Because if they're not willing to answer you, if they're not willing to show you what's on the inside, there's always going to be another thing out there. So I'm hoping that by hearing some of the answers and some of this knowledge transfer, that it'll encourage you, perhaps to ask more questions. There's nothing silly, nothing dumb. Just ask the question. I mean, believe me, the only way I learned a lot of stuff is just by, trying stuff out, asking. If I don't have the answer, maybe someone else will. I don't have, obviously, all the answers, and I'll give the best I can, some idea of what it is. But sometimes you just got to roll the dice on these things and give it a whirl. But I do want to, if I can help someone avoid perhaps a pitfall or buying something that is not going to work for them, that's kind of stuff that I like to help out with. So keep the questions going and keep watching.